There are disturbing movies, and then there's Apt Pupil, based on a story by Stephen King. It's about a teenager who blackmails a former Nazi officer, which already sounds pretty dark. But that turned out to be the least disturbing part. The production itself was overshadowed by a scene so controversial it nearly took down an entire studio. And that's without even getting into the lawsuits, the rumors, the cover-ups, a teenage star with a tragic fate, and a director who went from Hollywood glory to complete cancellation. So hit that like button and share the video, because today we're diving into a film that still makes people uncomfortable, sparks debate, and leaves more questions than answers. The story of Apt Pupil and all the chaos around it eventually points to director Bryan Singer, but it actually started much earlier with a Stephen King novella. It was part of his collection Different Seasons, the same book that gave us Stand By Me and The Shawshank Redemption. But unlike those warmer, feel-good stories, Apt Pupil was pure nightmare fuel, a disturbing look at how easily innocence can turn into a fascination with evil. It follows Todd Bowden, your typical all-American teenager. Good grades, loving parents, bright future, the whole package. Until one day, he finds out that his quiet old neighbor, Kurt Doosander, is actually a Nazi war criminal hiding in plain sight. Instead of turning him in, Todd blackmails him into reliving his crimes from the Holocaust. But those talks don't just bring the past back, they start changing them both. Todd gets pulled into the darkness, and Doosander's cruelty slowly comes back to life. Different Seasons came out in 1982 and quickly became one of King's most talked about books. King later said Apt Pupil made some editors so uncomfortable they wanted to cut it out completely. But he stood his ground. And like most of his stories, it didn't take long before Hollywood came knocking. That's when things started to spiral. The movie rights to Apt Pupil were first picked up in 1983 by producer Richard Kobritz, who had already worked on several Stephen King adaptations. For the role of Doosander, he went straight to James Mason, one of the most respected actors of his era. Mason agreed, but passed away in July 1984, right before filming was set to begin. Kobritz then approached another legend, Richard Burton. Unbelievably, Burton also died just a month later. By 1987, it finally looked like things were back on track. Kobritz brought the project back with British actor Nicol Williamson as Doosander and teen star Ricky Schroder as Todd. The director was Alan Bridges, a rising name in British cinema. But 10 weeks into filming, the production company went bankrupt. When they tried to restart it a year later, Schroder had already grown too much to match the earlier scenes. Stephen King saw about 40 minutes of the rough cut and said it looked promising, but the project was dead in the water. Before long, people in Hollywood were calling Apt Pupil a cursed film. Kobritz walked away, and for years nobody wanted to touch it, until the 1990s, when a young filmmaker named Bryan Singer came along and decided to take his shot. Bryan Singer's love for movies started early, but he was just as into books. When he was 19, he came across Different Seasons and got hooked on Apt Pupil. The twisted bond between the teenager and the old man fascinated him. He followed every update about the planned 1987 adaptation, waiting to see it hit theaters. When that version fell apart, he made himself a promise. One day, he'd make his own. It took a while to get there. First, he made his debut with public access. Then came The Usual Suspects, a breakout hit that made millions, won 2 Oscars, and turned him into one of Hollywood's hottest young directors. Studios were sending him scripts non-stop. But even with all that success, Singer couldn't get Apt Pupil out of his head. In 1995, he finally decided to go for it. He teamed up with his friend, writer Brandon Boyce, and started working on a spec script. No studio, no contract, just the two of them chasing an idea. Singer knew exactly what he wanted. The first thing to go was the extreme violence from King's novella. He wanted to focus on the psychological tension between Todd and Doosander instead. He also read up on Nazi war criminals and was struck by how many of them felt no remorse at all. That detail became the core of his version, a story about cruelty. One of the biggest changes came with the dream sequences. In King's story, Todd has disturbing, Nazi-themed nightmares. Singer wanted to keep that element, but with his own twist. He told Boyce about a scene he imagined. Todd is in the locker room shower, surrounded by classmates, when suddenly the room turns into a concentration camp shower filled with Jewish adults. Keep that in mind, because that scene would come back later, and it would haunt the production in ways no one saw coming. At that point, Bryan Singer's Apt Pupil project was so under the radar that even Stephen King didn't know it existed. While Singer and Brandon Boyce were still polishing the script, word spread that King was taking back the rights. They'd just expired. Instead of panicking, Singer came up with a plan. He mailed King the first draft along with a copy of The Usual Suspects, hoping it would win him over. A few days later, King replied. He said some changes caught him off guard, but the story still captured the spirit of his book. Impressed, he handed Singer the rights for just $1. a symbolic gesture he often made for young filmmakers, and agreed to proper payment once the movie got made. With King's blessing, everything started falling into place. Singer teamed up with producer Scott Rudin, one of Hollywood's biggest power players, with a long list of hits behind him. Rudin didn't even finish reading the script before saying yes, and quickly brought Spelling Films on board to finance it. By mid-1996, Singer was one of Hollywood's golden boys. King's approval, a heavyweight producer backing him, and full creative freedom to adapt one of his favorite stories. But that momentum wouldn't last long. The first cracks were already showing, and things were about to get messy. When Bryan Singer met with producer Scott Rudin for the first time, he came in with a clear vision, how he wanted to film Apt Pupil, the tone, even who he pictured for the main roles. Rudin had read the script, and he didn't hold back. He thought the story was too disturbing and would kill the movie's commercial chances. Singer pushed back. That darkness, he argued, was exactly what made the story work. They went back and forth for weeks, trying to find middle ground, but Singer wouldn't budge. He wasn't making a safer version. He wanted to keep the same moral ambiguity that made King's story so unsettling. Then came the budget talk. Rudin warned that no studio would write a big check for something that bleak. Singer disagreed, and creative differences quickly turned into full-on tension and endless arguments. Eventually, Rudin hit his limit. Frustrated and burned out, he walked away from the project. That move didn't just leave Singer stranded, it set off alarm bells at Spelling Films, who were furious to lose one of Hollywood's top producers. Bryan Singer couldn't stop thinking about all the failed attempts to make Apt Pupil. For a while, it really did feel cursed, but instead of giving up, he started looking for new allies. That's when producers Don Murphy and Jane Hampshire joined the project, the same duo behind Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers. Unlike Scott Rudin, they weren't scared of the story's darker edge. They actually loved it. Still, the project didn't gain real momentum until a Hollywood heavyweight stepped in, Mike Medavoy. Medavoy was a veteran, a former studio executive who'd produced everything from box office hits to Oscar winners. He just launched his own company, Phoenix Pictures, and locked a distribution deal with TriStar. The film got a modest $14 million budget. Not huge, but enough for Singer to keep full creative control. Then, in July 1996, things got even better. Singer signed with 20th Century Fox to direct X-Men, one of the most anticipated superhero movies of the decade. He told the studio he wanted to film Apt Pupil first, and surprisingly, they agreed. After years of false starts, new producers, and studio changes, Singer finally had Apt Pupil rolling. But if he thought the curse was over, he was about to find out the hard way that it wasn't. For Doosander, Singer wanted British actor Ian McKellen. Today, we all know him as Gandalf or Magneto, but back then, his film career hadn't really taken off. He was a respected stage actor who mostly did small supporting roles, and Hollywood never quite knew what to do with him. But when Singer saw him in Richard III, that was it. He realized McKellen could be charming, fragile, and terrifying all at once. For Todd, Singer already had someone in mind, Brad Renfro. After The Client and Sleepers, Renfro was one of the most talked about young actors in Hollywood. He had that rare mix of intensity and vulnerability, perfect for playing a kid with a dark side. But off-screen, his own life wasn't so different. He came from a broken home and was already slipping into drugs and trouble. People on set noticed he didn't have much guidance, but that didn't seem to bother Hollywood or Singer. He wanted Renfro for the role, and that was that. Brad was only 14 years old. Singer kept building the supporting cast while the production hired Kathy Henderson Casting to look for extras. But the real challenge came with the now infamous shower scene we mentioned earlier. And remember, this was mid-1990s Hollywood. The agency posted an open call in Backstage West for boys aged 14 to 17 to appear in a high school locker room. Dozens showed up to audition, each accompanied by a parent or guardian. Production assistants handed out consent forms that mentioned partial nudity, but never explained what that actually meant. Most parents didn't think much of it. They just assumed the boys would be filmed from the shoulders up. They wouldn't realize how wrong they were until the day Apt Pupil started filming. Filming began in January 1997 around Los Angeles and Pasadena. On set, Ian McKellen was friendly and relaxed. The second someone yelled, "Action," he turned into Doosander. He could slip into the character's darkness instantly, like in the infamous cat scene. The production used 4 different cats and worked with an animal coordinator to make sure none were harmed. Brad Renfro, on the other hand, liked testing limits, even asking out loud how far he could go. He'd swipe packs of cigarettes from actors or crew members, and everyone just laughed it off, thinking it was typical teenage behavior. But once the cameras were on, he was all in. Everyone agreed he understood Todd better than anyone, and many thought this would be the role that turned him into a star. Still, people on set started noticing things that felt off. Renfro was working crazy hours, way beyond what's legal for a kid his age. Then came the rap party. It was meant for adults only, but Renfro showed up anyway, blending in like one of them. Everyone expected Singer or the producers to step in and say something, but no one did. Some people on set thought the biggest problems on Apt Pupil would come from Brad Renfro, but the real trouble came from somewhere else. Toward the end of filming, Singer shot what would become the movie's most controversial scene, the shower sequence. The production moved to Altadena Middle School in Pasadena using the school's actual locker room and showers. The crew filled the space with fog panels and cold blue lighting to create a dreamlike, uneasy atmosphere. Renfro took his mark, joined by around 20 teenage extras cast through Kathy Henderson casting. Since the scene involved real showering, a certain level of nudity was unavoidable. Singer decided to use 2 cameras and kept the crew as small as possible, just cinematographer Newton Thomas Siegel, a few assistant directors, and the props team. Most shots stayed tight on Renfro's face and shoulders, but in the background, some extras were still visible. Singer asked for more steam to cover them, but it didn't completely work. A few tracking shots even showed more than what had been cleared. Singer didn't seem too worried at the time. He was focused on getting the shot exactly how he wanted it. What he didn't realize was that this scene was about to trigger a scandal that would shake the entire production. When Apt Pupil wrapped, Bryan Singer went straight into post-production. At first, everything seemed to be going smoothly. The producers were happy, TriStar was excited, and everyone believed they had something special. A bold, provocative film that could cement Singer as one of Hollywood's next big directors. And with Stephen King's name attached, what could possibly go wrong? But that didn't last. In April 1997, Singer got a call from TriStar asking him to come into the office. When he arrived, the producers were already there. The room was tense. Then came the news. The studio had just been hit with a lawsuit. It came from a 14-year-old extra from the shower scene, who claimed Singer had crossed professional boundaries during filming. While the team was still trying to figure out how to respond, 2 more lawsuits followed, this time from extras aged 16 and 17. They supported the first claim but went further, accusing Singer of negligence, emotional distress, and invasion of privacy. Singer denied everything, calling it a misunderstanding. He said no minors had been filmed in an explicit way and pointed out that he wasn't even present during casting. The extras, he explained, were pre-selected by assistant directors and production staff. Producers Don Murphy and Jane Hampshire backed him up, insisting that every parent had signed a release and that the production followed all the proper safety protocols. But none of that stopped the story from exploding. Within days, the lawsuits hit the press. Newspapers, talk shows, entertainment magazines. TriStar went into panic mode. The studio shut down post-production and ordered a full review of the shower scene. Singer pushed back, arguing they couldn't cut it. It was key to understanding Todd's psychology. The executives agreed, but warned him. If the scene stayed as it was, everyone involved could end up in court, and the movie might never see the light of day. Worse, it could destroy their careers. Singer could already see his future, X-Men and everything else, slipping away. After several tense meetings, TriStar finally made a decision. The shower scene would stay, but it had to be reshot with new footage. And to make sure nothing went wrong this time, they brought in a legal advisor to oversee every step of the process. Singer got the green light and the budget to reshoot the scene. This time, every extra on set was over 18. But that wasn't the only change. He filmed tighter close-ups of Brad Renfro, filled the room with more steam, and told cinematographer Newton Thomas Siegel to keep anyone in the background completely out of focus. He also added new cutaways, drops of water, feet, silhouettes. In post, Singer rebuilt the sequence from scratch, cutting about 20 seconds from the original. He cooled down the color grade to give it a detached, dreamlike feel, and layered in sound effects, breathing, rushing water, the echo of showers, to fill in what was now left unseen. He finished the new version fast and screened it for Mike Medavoy, Don Murphy, Jane Hampshire, and the TriStar executives. Everyone agreed it worked better, or at least it would keep them out of trouble. With that new cut, Apt Pupil quietly settled all 3 lawsuits out of court. But the question lingered: had they solved the problem or just covered it up? Apt Pupil premiered on September 9, 1998, at the Venice Film Festival. Singer, the producers Ian McKellen, and Brad Renfro all got good reviews, but the atmosphere was tense. Every interview came back to the same question: the shower scene. No matter what they said, the controversy wouldn't go away. The real test was the theatrical release. With all the bad press surrounding the movie, TriStar decided to keep things quiet. The marketing was minimal, just a few posters and trailers. The film was pulled from other festivals, and Singer was left out of the promo circuit completely. Around Hollywood, people started keeping their distance. Rumors even spread that Fox was considering dropping him from X-Men. In that climate, Apt Pupil hit theaters on October 23, 1998. It made only $8 million on a $14 million budget. Critics praised Singer's direction and the performances by Renfro and McKellen, but it wasn't enough. In most countries, the movie skipped theaters entirely and went straight to home video. Even Stephen King, who usually supports every adaptation of his work and stayed silent. After everything that happened, Apt Pupil still felt cursed. But as it turned out, the worst was yet to come. After Apt Pupil, Brad Renfro kept working, and everyone expected him to make it big. But he couldn't escape his demons. The partying, the bad habits, they started bleeding into his work. He lost major roles, and before long, the headlines stopped being about his talent and focused on his arrests and failed rehab attempts. In January 2008, Renfro was found dead at just 25. Some outlets tried to link his downfall to Apt Pupil and its dark themes, but there was never any real evidence of that. If anything, Renfro had always spoken highly of Singer. Ironically, it was Singer's own story that took a darker turn. After Apt Pupil, he directed X-Men, a massive hit that launched one of Hollywood's biggest franchises. For a while, he was untouchable, one of the hottest directors in the business. But the higher he rose, the harder he fell. Reports began to surface about his behavior on set, and eventually he was fired from Bohemian Rhapsody. Then came even more serious accusations, claims so disturbing that even mentioning them here could get this channel taken down. When all of that came out, people couldn't help but look back at Apt Pupil and its infamous shower scene. And today, in Hollywood, Bryan Singer's name isn't just controversial, it's radioactive. Meanwhile, Apt Pupil quietly faded into obscurity. It's rarely mentioned, hard to find on streaming, and when Stephen King has talked about it, he simply called it a cursed story. Still, not everything that came from it was bad. Ian McKellen went on to become one of the most respected actors in film history, playing some of the most iconic roles of his career. Mike Medavoy, Don Murphy, and Jane Hampshire kept producing in Hollywood, this time far from controversy. The fallout from the shower scene even led to real change. The Screen Actors Guild tightened its rules for scenes involving minors or nudity, adding stronger safety and consent guidelines. Over time, Apt Pupil started getting a second look. Critics and scholars began revisiting it, not just as a cursed production, but as a dark reflection on how extremist ideologies resurface in the modern world. From the beginning, Apt Pupil was surrounded by controversy, and by the time it reached theaters, that shadow had only grown darker. What started as a Stephen King story became a film weighed down by scandal, a mirror of both its director's rise and fall, and the tragedy of its young star. In the end, it leaves us with a question that still hits hard. Can we really separate the art from the artist? Let me know what you think in the comments. A Kazakh journalist comes to America, causes chaos at rodeos, tries to kidnap Pamela Anderson, and leaves almost everyone hating him. That's Borat.